Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Ed Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video. Join the Rabyd Nation, a nation of people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. Today I want to talk about something, get on my soapbox a little bit. It's a Friday, so I'm doing Rabyd Reflections, and I've been reflecting on this for quite some time. I was going to do this last week, but the question of what kind of pastor were you came up. But today I want to talk about a thought I've had as I've looked. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of stories from various people deconverting. And the story goes something like this. I was taught all these things as a child. And then when I got older, as I began to analyze all these claims that my childhood had taught me, I began to realize that a lot of it just wasn't true or had questionable truth. So at some point, I began to examine these claims, questions, and everything else, and using the stuff that I was taught as a child, I began to deconstruct. I had this comment recently that, somebody was homeschooled, and that homeschooling ended up being, some of the foundation of why they deconverted. And so a lot of these comments, and more recently, has just led me to start asking the question, is childhood indoctrination basically set up to fail? In other words, sooner or later, the child that's indoctrinated faces the real information or alternative information or any kind of information, thanks to the internet age that we live in. They began to learn other things, and that contradicts what they were taught with as a child. And then as they begin to investigate, they realize that the other stuff actually has some backing, and the religious indoctrination that they had doesn't have any backing. And does this childhood indoctrination actually make, the way it's being done these days compared to the internet, and its openness, does it lead people to deconverting? Because in the end, sooner or later, I was speaking with this with my therapist on Wednesday, and she made the remark, sooner or later, regardless of how careful, something along these lines, I'm paraphrasing. Sooner or later, no matter how careful a parent is, kids get access to information, that their parents don't necessarily want them to have. And she works with a lot of youth. And she said, no matter, and parents live in this delusional dream world that somehow they can protect their kids from ideas and information that they don't want them to have. They can protect them. I mean, I can't, I remember in the 90s, there were all kinds of talk about, protections against porn and information and things like that. You could get these filters and stuff, and I'm pretty sure you can still do that. But if a kid really wants to get access to something, they can, and it doesn't take much. Just looking at something like, having a smartphone, where you can access the internet. Even if a kid isn't allowed to have one themselves, most of them have friends that will say, oh yeah, sure, you can borrow my phone, look something up. And sooner or later, kids get access to alternatives. Now, I was a Christian education pastor, and the motive that we had to getting children in early was very pronounced. We put an emphasis on children. And there's a good reason for it. One, it's a good reason in the sense that if you're looking at indoctrinating somebody, this is what you do. You go after children. Because one, you'll get them long term. And two, you'll get their parents. Sooner their parents will darken the door and put their fanny in the pew. And you go after kids because you can teach them the truth early. That's the way we put it. And the earlier they get that truth, the more it'll sustain them, as they get older. We knew the statistics that people that were still in the church had been in the church since they of an early age. They had been presented the gospel early. They've been, indoctrinated early. That's the way I'd put it now. They were brought into the fold, and the church, it was very important that the church also be a loving environment where people, love bombed all the time and things like that. I've said it before, the best indoctrination usually doesn't have a lot of fear to it. It's more of a creating emotional connections that you don't want to give up, okay? And the emotional connection that, that I was supposed to bring in as a Christian education pastor was this emotional connection to this imaginary character named Jesus. The Jesus that is created by most discipleship programs for children is an imaginary character. It doesn't even really line up with the character of Jesus in the Bible, because the character of Jesus that is taught to children and later youth, when you teach it to children, he's this caring person that you can always run to, that's always going to take care of your problems, that always has comfort for you when nobody else does. When nobody else understands, he understands you. It's this mythical figure that Jesus becomes to a child, where he does everything for you. And it creates this imaginary friend, okay, that, it's funny how we laugh at kids with their imaginary friends, and yet we have a lot of religious systems that basically create people's imaginary friends and then indoctrinate them into that imaginary friend. That particular imaginary friend is important. And we call that Jesus, God, Allah, whatever you want to call it. And once I get the kid into that childhood mode of it, just accepting Jesus as their always comfort, all this other stuff, as they turn into youth, the image of Jesus changes. He's more of a radical. He's more of a guy who didn't think like everybody else. It feeds into that rebellion aspect of youth that's pretty much naturally there. I'm waiting for this to happen to my grandkids, and much to my children's chagrin. But it's not a bad phase of life, because it's a great phase of life, because you're starting to think abstractly and you're starting to open up, to other forms of information. And I've noted a lot of the stories of deconversion on this channel. This is where the problems begin if they grew up in the church, okay? Because they have this imaginary friend Jesus that's meek and mild and pets lambs and gathers children to them and hugs them. And now they got this radical Jesus that goes into the temple and overthrows the money changers and gets in people's faces and tells them that they're snakes and vipers, and this powerful Jesus that is taking on the status quo, which is something youth like to do. And it's that transition, though. How can you have how can that be the same person? Okay, how does that work? The first Jesus gives safety. The second Jesus kind of gives this self-actualization, this search for, the real truth, And then the adult Jesus is much, much more sophisticated. Okay, and you go after kids because they can't really assess whether any of this is true. You start to assess whether the value of truth when you become an adolescent, and you're not really good at it at first either. And indoctrination takes advantage of that. But in the world of the West, and I realize that the situation is very different, like in the Middle East, where you have predominantly Muslim countries and information outside of Islam is suppressed. I'm not talking about that. I think one of the keys to why it's set up to fail is the openness of our society and the openness of information that we have access to. Okay, it's this openness to information, this openness to ideas, which is why I oppose people that want to censor or shame people or cancel people. Okay, I oppose that because that kind of attitude is what leads to totalitarianism. It's the free flow of information that allows people to assess for themselves what is valuable to themselves. And, yeah, that has its inherent risks. But I'd rather have those risks than the absolute brutal ideological totalitarianism of deciding what information gets told and what does not. Okay? So when I look at what I did in the past over the years, I'm now beginning to have a little hope that maybe some of the things that I did is destined to fail. Okay, it's destined to break apart, because there are certain elements to that because I learned it from my Sunday school teacher, and I kind of passed it on to all the kids that went through my Sunday school, that the Bible has all the answers, and it shouldn't be afraid of hard questions. Now, I know that a lot of Sunday schools don't teach that, but a lot of others, if you're going to be intellectually honest, if the Bible is the truth, then it should be able to handle all the questions and handle the hard questions. The problem is it can't. And it's probably the first thing that you really notice, that this book doesn't line up with reality very well. Okay? And that's the thing, because the internet exposes you to the real world of ideological differences, and that there's multiple competing ideas, hypotheses, theories that all compete for this idea of this is what is reality, what conforms to reality, what has predictive power. And you begin to realize that the Bible doesn't really do that very well. Okay, it doesn't predict things very well. Despite, I've had people, Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies. It's easy to fulfill a prophecy if you're being written about after the fact, and the writer wants you to fulfill a prophecy, and he can cherry pick from the Old Testament and put it in there. And a lot of you, that's, it's the big one. Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies. It's either that or the moral argument. And the problem is both of them, when you really think about them, are crap. Okay? And in childhood indoctrination, that's what you're taught. But then you begin to realize, well, it's really easy to fulfill a prophecy if the writer is looking through the Old Testament and saying, oh, you know what, this Old Testament prophecy, I think I can connect this to Jesus if I make up this story about it. And there's no way to tell that that's not what happened. I've had comments talk about, well, just because it's hearsay doesn't mean it's not true. Sure, except here's the problem. Given our penchant to tell stories and embellish, how much then of the story is true? And you're constantly playing this game of what's true, what's not. I had some people try to talk about Moses in Egypt this week, and I stopped conversating, not because I didn't think the conversation would be interesting, I just didn't have time. But if I were to follow up on that, it's like, yeah, but if you go to any Egyptologist and ask the question, is there any example of a whole bunch of millions of Hebrew slaves being in Egypt? And the answer is no. And they kept meticulous records of who their slaves were. Okay. Most scholars now agree that Moses is pure grade A mythology. Okay. He's right up there with Hercules. Okay. And that becomes a real problem. Okay, and it's not of most scholarship, but it's just there's an incredible lack of evidence for this character's existence as a real historical figure. And that's the issue. You start to study these things, you get out of childhood indoctrination, and you're told all these things are absolutely true. And it's the absolutely true, the nature of indoctrination that says these are the truths, these are the 10 commandments that you can live by. This is, love your, break them all down into love everybody and love Jesus, God with all you got. This is the way reality really is. This is the future path that God has for us. This is all this stuff. And then you get exposed to alternative ideas, and it's actually the indoctrination that is so far-fetched and so wrong with reality, it doesn't line up with reality at all, that it actually helps contribute to your downfall of your faith. And in my own story, I grew up in the church. I was in, some of my earliest memories are from beginner class. in the basement of our church, in the corner with the pink walls and, Noah's Ark on the wall and Adam and Eve in a corner, with tastefully adorned fig leaves and the old flannel graph, where they would tell stories to us, Bible stories. So I've been there. I've been indoctrinated. A lot of love, a lot of care, not a lot of hellfire and brimstone, although there was some. And parents that loved me who just felt that, they were doing me, they didn't want me to go through some of the things they had gone through. So, their motives were pure, if nothing else. But very early on when I hit Bible college and seminary, I realized that what I had been taught and what reality was, even in the midst of the Bible, were two very different things. And the only thing that kept me in the faith for a long time was a lot of emotional connections, the desire to see my father again, the sunk cost fallacy emotion that you have. Man, I've spent too much time. I've got all this education, this religious stuff. What am I going to do with that? What can I do with that? And it's the indoctrination as a child, and then you get to see the real biblical reality of what is proven. And that actually contributes to your deconversion, because I look back at it ideologically. I knew that we had to find other things or this faith was useless. There was no good evidence. I mean, if you want to believe hearsay, I guess that's your business, but, I've got some swampland in Florida to sell you too. And that's kind of, you set yourself up for charlatans and frauds when you believe hearsay. So good luck with that. And slowly but surely, that part eroded. It was the emotional connection that kept me in. It was the emotional experientialism that kept me in. And, people say, oh, you had this emotional traumatic experience and you left the faith. No. I left the faith in my brain long before I did in my heart, okay? Because in my brain, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of problems here, and I don't know if they're going to be reconciled in my lifetime. And then the more you look at it, and the more you look at it, the more it falls apart. And I'm wondering how much effect my childhood indoctrination contributed to my deconversion, because I think it sets it up. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing some stories this week of people who said, what they taught me actually contributed to me walking away. Okay, because I think it did. I think it's destined to fail, because sooner or later a kid grows up and they get exposed to alternatives, to the internet, through books, through whatever. They start listening, to old clips on YouTube of Christopher Hitchens, and they go, damn, the man has a point. And they start to listen to other things and like, oh, that's not what I was taught as a child, but that's not what they told me the evolutionists believed either. And you suddenly realize that these apologists are misrepresenting their opponents on purpose. And that's deceptive, and that's lying. And we're not supposed to lie as Christians. And slowly the emotional stuff begins to get worn away too. It's the last thing that goes. Okay, I was talking about this yesterday with my therapist as well, is how intellectually, I know it's all bullshit, okay? But neurologically and experientially and emotionally, this stuff takes a long time to go away, okay? Because it's ingrained to us. That's why our emotions are important. People ask me, where I fit there. I'm a Stoic. A lot of people think that Stoics are unemotional. That's not true. It's just we realize that emotions have certain value, and they're very valuable, but in a proper context. They're not the best thing to make decisions on, okay? They're great at motivating a decision once you've made it, but they're not the best thing to go with, okay? Going with your gut is a good way to get hurt, okay? So, unless you're really good instinctively with people and situations, that's not always good. And usually that's fed by some other things. But my point is today, I think it's going to backfire. Now, there's other parts of the world. I get that, like South America is mostly Pentecostal and Catholic, and there's not as much access to the internet down there. Africa's the same way. Islam openly represses stuff. But in Europe and the United States and other countries influenced by Westernism like Japan, you see this deconverting or not believing at all in the first place a lot because they just don't teach it. But in places where Christian indoctrination does happen, kids aren't buying it. They're walking away from it. They're getting out of it. And even if they grew up in a Christian household and were homeschooled, they get out, they get exposed to other information, they suddenly realize everything my parents taught me is BS, and they walk away. Now, that's just my freewheeling discussion. I'm interested in your thoughts on this because I'm running with this theory that childhood indoctrination is ultimately set up to fail in a free, open society with free information. That the only way child indoctrination ultimately works and continues to work is if you have a society dedicated to that faith and religion, like Islam. Like Islam, child indoctrinates, and then they never really get exposed to anything else because their country represses a lot of things, for instance. And it's that kind of thing, it's the difference. It's keeping, liberty and freedom open because it allows people to assess for themselves what they want to follow. And if you have the freedom to follow what you want to follow without repercussions, sure, you're going to eventually deconvert. And childhood indoctrination may actually contribute and help push you over. I know intellectually it did for me. It was the emotion part that stuck. But I'm interested in everybody's thoughts. Other things, I'm feeling much better. Last week I was really sick last weekend, and when you spend an entire day either standing over the toilet or laying in bed trying to get 20 minutes of sleep, Friday was kind of a blur to me. And so I did something on Saturday real quick, and it was good, I think, but it was still. But I have gastritis. A few years ago, I don't even know. There might be even a video on this channel where I thank healthcare workers, for their work fixing me. But I have some of those gastro issues, and it's something. I've lifted weights for a lot of things. I walk. I do a lot of exercise to kind of keep my body going. But gastro health is kind of a different animal altogether. You can't just exercise to make it better. It's all about what you're eating and how much and all that stuff. So I've been looking at that. And the real problem is my hypersensitivity does not like veggies anymore. It's like if I try to eat a vegetable or have vegetable oil or something in there, and that's what triggered it this time was a salad. Like I ate a salad at work, and a few hours later I'm puking. So, and my stomach just doesn't like veggies. In fact, some fruits, like highly acidic fruits, I can't eat those either. Same thing, too sensitive. And so I'm left with like mild fruits and berries and things like that, and nuts and things like that I can still eat. And meat, and so I've been heading towards a carnivore diet, partly by choice and partly by necessity. So there's that part, and I'm hoping that'll help. I hope that'll help a bit. But I'm also relooking at my supplementation, my dietary supplements, and I'm like, there's a dietary supplement I'm trying out right now to see if that'll help. Hopefully, this whole incident just caused me to kind of look at it a little bit more deeper and say, this is one area. I don't want to live forever. I'm sure there'll come a point where I'll become weary with life and say, screw it. I'm not going to kill myself or anything, but it's just like there comes a point where you realize, God, this should just end. It should be done. I've had enough. And I've had those moments, where I'm standing on the curb and, would somebody please push me in front of a bus? That's kind of the nature of the beast when you have, high-functioning depression and anxiety all your life because of, hypersensitivity, autism, things. But I keep going. And I enjoy what I'm doing right now. So, I'm enjoying life, and my grandkids are cool and fun. I'm not sure about their parents at times, but the grandkids are pretty cool. And so I'm sticking around for them. And I want to stick around. I have this kind of unwritten goal of dancing with all my granddaughters at their wedding, if that's what they want to do. And so that's kind of where I'm headed. And so it's an area of my life that I'm looking at. Um, I don't know. I talked a little about this in one video that I did during a premiere of doing a special video once a month of all my hater comments and see how that goes over. So if you hate me and want to put a hate comment and want to get mentioned, this might be a good idea. But I'd be interested in anybody that's interested in that. I found I've been looking at my writing and I suddenly realized I'm trying to look for this one overall motivation to write. And I suddenly realized that every project's going to have its own separate motivation. I still need a muse, something that inspires me to write, but I think the motivation, like my deconversion story, I finally settled that the motivation for that is to tell my own story to my grandkids. And it's caused me to go back to the story and rewrite it a little bit as if I'm talking to my grandkids and my progeny in the future. Because I don't want other people to tell that story. And yeah, I've got the videos online. But there's something very permanent about a book. Okay, not permanent in the sense, it's in air quotes, light air quotes. But it's that, once you have like 100,000 books out there of your story, it's hard to get rid of all of them. Okay, it is. And sooner or later that's going to cross somebody's path. And I want to write that for my posterity more than anything. I don't want somebody else telling that story. And that's become my new motive. And it's interesting how I feel like the way the writing's going to go, and it's starting to feel that way, is I'm telling this story as if I'm talking to them, have all the grandkids gathered around and I'm telling the story. Now, they're too young to understand any of this yet now, but I kind of imagine what they're going to look like in 10, 15 years, and they're sitting down across from me. How would I tell this story to them? And why I don't believe and why I stopped being a pastor and why I don't go to church. That kind of thing. So that motive. My fiction writing, I'm searching for why would I do it. And I don't want to waste my time. I only got so much time on planet Earth and I don't know how much. So you go forward with that. So I'm kind of stuck there and it's like, it's therapeutic. I'll give it that, and maybe that'll be enough motivation to do it. But I'm starting to feel like my fiction writing needs to become like this channel. Yeah, I'm here to make you think, and yeah, I'm here to entertain. But I'm also here to, it's a good side hustle to make some money. And if my writing can become that too, I'm good with that too. So I'm working on that. Just a renewed interest. The supplement I'm taking, I feel a little bit more energetic the last couple days. So I hope that continues. A large part of my motivation has been my energy level. It's just been really low, and it's winter, and it's spring, and now it's finally warming up, and I'm getting more energetic. But I also know that the sensitivity to bright light and heat is going to kick in at some point when it gets too warm and too bright, and I'm going to have to deal with that. Thankfully for sunglasses and cold packs in the freezer. So we'll see what happens. So that's kind of where my life is. As far as the channel goes, I am hoping to create a routine where I'm constantly engaged in a process of improving the channel in a lot of other ways other than the videos. But I'm also trying to rededicate myself a commitment to doing better quality videos. Now, I need some new hardware. There's no doubt about that. But I'm also thinking about going to Baja Con, which is in August. The problem is I engage this to, can I do both? And the answer might be no. And so the issue is, do I save up the money and ask for money for the hardware, or do I go to Baja Con, promote the channel, and hope my hardware holds out for another 6 months? Or do I press it and see what I can do to get both? Because the one thing, I have a job that meets all my basic needs. I have this channel that's kind of injected some extra money to make life easier. And I'm saving a little bit of that every time. But at the rate we're going, it's going to take a while. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't know, I may do a video. I've said this a couple times. I may do a video on Saturday explaining the situation for Baja Con and why I'm having some hesitations going. And they're all practical. It's not like desire. Desire is to go, but practicality is kind of kicking me in the butt. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. So, Yeah, I think that's about it. Because I was sick most of the week, I just have been not really thinking about much and doing much other than videos, and it's been in some ways mentally relaxing, but in other ways it's just kind of frustrating. So hopefully I have a better week coming up next week. So thanks everybody. I mean, one channel note I can say is this is the first time that I've done a reaction video on Monday and then a Bible study on Tuesday, and the Bible study got more views than the reaction. That's the first time that's ever happened since I've been doing this new format. So that was interesting. So the topic of the Bible study had definitely caught some people's interest. Imagine that, sex sells. So there's that. But, thanks everybody, for your patience this last weekend. I know the Rabyd reflections dropped a little bit late, but I just was not feeling well, and so thank you for your patience and all your well wishes. I appreciated it, and thanks for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. I want to give a special shout out to my members. I'll put them up on screen. Thank you very much, guys. You members, from an emotional standpoint, you do this heart good that somebody's willing to invest in this channel, invest in the nation. Thank you very much. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. So don't waste all your time, money, and opportunities on the trappings of religion and faith, but instead give them to yourself, to the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.